with some brisk winds around at times, and those northerly winds will start to feed in some cooler air as well. So things are set to be turning colder for many of us as we head over the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Disney and good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Very good evening to you from the newsroom. Free Speech Nation up next. First, though, a look at the headlines just after 7 o'clock. The Labour conference has wrapped up for the day after speeches from the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Opening the afternoon session today, Cabinet Minister Darren Jones called for Labour to hold power for 5 terms and to make it the natural party of government. Well, earlier, Angela Rayner declared now is Labour's moment, promising to bolster workers' rights, to build high-quality homes and strengthen communities. Take a listen.
There will be no complacency. We've seen where that leads. Don't forget what they did. Partygate, COVID contracts, the lies, division, scapegoating and the unfunded tax cuts for the richest that crashed our economy. Don't forget any of it. The Tories failed Britain and they tried to cover it up. A crater in the heart of Britain's economy, a puncher in the pocket of every working family, and a £22 billion black hole.
Well, that conference is running until Tuesday, ending, of course, with Sir Keir Starmer's leader's speech, which we will bring live to you here on GB News. But the Labour leadership is gearing up for a major conference showdown tomorrow over cuts to the winter fuel payment. Trade unions are demanding a U-turn on the policy, which is set to remove payments from 10 million pensioners across the country. Unite has launched a billboard campaign and is set to hold a protest outside the conference, calling the cuts cruel and politically inept. But Chancellor Rachel Reeves insists the move is necessary to fix a £22 billion budget shortfall. Elsewhere in politics, Reform's leader Nigel Farage sat down with GB News' political editor Christopher Hope at their party conference yesterday. Speaking on Chopper's political podcast, Mr Farage said in order for Reform to make an impact at the local elections next May, the party will have to complete 10 years of evolution in the next 6 months. However, that hasn't stopped him from setting quite the target.
We've got enough people to have 2,300 candidates. The question is, are they the right 2,300 candidates? Because we will be held to a higher standard than everybody else. I'm aiming in those elections to win hundreds of seats.
And you can listen to that full interview on all media platforms. Just search for Chopper's Political Podcast. In other news, 31 people across the UK have been arrested in a Home Office crackdown on people smuggling gangs. The three-day nationwide operation involving the National Crime Agency, police and international partners targeted locations including Belfast, Liverpool and Luton. Over £400,000 of cash and fraudulent identity documents were also seized during checks at ports, airports and some road networks. Minister for Border Security Dame Angela Eagle says the government is cracking down on criminal gangs, exploiting vulnerable people and profiting from their despair. We've heard tonight that a second man's been arrested over what police are describing as a shocking kidnap of an 87-year-old man in Oldham. The pensioner was dragged into a car, attacked and then dumped miles from his home, leading to serious injuries. Greater Manchester Police say he did find help by knocking on a door after that incident. Two men aged 24 and 39 have been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, one of them already released on bail. And finally, they've always been there for us. Well, that's for the past 3 decades anyway, as today marks the 30th birthday of one of the most iconic series of all time. Yes, it's Friends. The show premiered for the first time back in 1994, fast becoming one of the most watched programmes on TV, lasting for 10 whole series. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, I'll hand you straight over to Free Speech Nation.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The Irish government drops new hate speech laws. The chief executive of Rape Crisis Scotland refuses to resign after a recent scandal, and security guards storm a free speech event in Brighton. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics, and of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors. They've really been working overtime this week. Coming up on the show tonight, members of Free Speech Brighton claim they were kicked out of a pub in the city earlier this week after they discussed gender ideology in schools. I'll be joined by two individuals from the group to hear what happened. Bernadette Spofforth, the woman who was arrested for allegedly publishing false communications online after the Southport knife attack, has had her case dropped by police with no further action. I'll be speaking to her about her experiences. The Bar Standards Board has launched a consultation to include new equality, diversity and inclusion measures for lawyers to follow. Family lawyer Sarah Phillimore will be here to tell me about what these changes mean. And of course, myself and my wonderful panel will be answering questions from this rather cheeky studio audience. My comedian guests this evening are Paul Cox and Jojo Sutherland. Hello, Jojo.
Hello.
You are down from Scotland.
Down from Scotland,
Gracing
up
us
from...
with your presence.
I have, yes, gallivanting as always.
As always,
yeah.
You are Jojo the Gallivanter.
Jojo the Gallivanter, living on the M6, I feel like at the moment.
Oh, is that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
But you've been well, have you?
Very well.
Very good.
Annoyingly well.
Annoyingly well. And for a contrast, let's go to Paul.
Suspiciously still alive.
You are still alive.
I know.
Well.
I've travelled quite far this weekend as well. I started my first gig this weekend was in Barnstable in Devon.
Oh.
And then I've come all the way back over to here, so...
You're real travelling, working...
Well, you've got to go... When you're me, you've got to go wherever the work is, and sometimes it's with places where they've never heard of you or seen you before.
And sometimes it's a basement in Paddington, like
yeah,
tonight.
exactly, yeah.
You'll do anything for the money. OK, let's get some questions from this audience. Our first question comes from Jackie. Hi, Jackie, hello.
Hello. Is free speech safe in Ireland?
It's a very good question. Of course, we've been covering the... threats to free speech in Ireland for a number of months now because the Irish government was sort of determined to push through its new hate speech bill, which, by the way, in which its legislation defined hatred as hatred. So that's convenient. Yeah. It could basically mean anything at all. But now the Minister for Justice has dropped plans for this. Helen McEntee has said that she's not going to include the hate speech element in the hate crime legislation. But, Jojo, there is still potential problems with this legislation anyway, because it uses terms that a lot of people don't agree with.
Yeah.
But it is good news, though, isn't it, that they're not going to criminalise hatred when the government themselves can't define what it means.
Yeah, well, that's part of the difficulty, is not being able to decide what is what.
Well,
but also,
yes.
it's only a temporary measure because she's determined to get it through.
Now, of course, you come from Scotland.
Yes.
They pushed through their hate speech legislation.
Did.
That turned out to be a bit of a disaster.
Well, it was a disaster because Hamza Yousaf ended up having however many complaints against him as soon as it was introduced.
Yes.
For hate speech in his inaugural speech when he was saying that Scotland was too white, the judiciary was too white, the police was too white. And
yeah, I remember.
So, yeah, there was hundreds of complaints against him that it was hate speech.
And that just proves the point, doesn't it? That if you can't define what hate is, anyone can phone up and say, well, I perceive that to be hateful.
Yeah,
you know?
well, and that's the thing, it's interpretation rather than... And also, we have hate speech laws. Do you know what I mean? You're not allowed to, you know, say things and be insightful to
we have
against
laws
race.
Against incitement to violence.
Yes, incitement to violence. But how you say something, and if you're saying something a particular way against something that is a crime. So if you're pointing out something that someone's done hideously, you know, grooming gangs or whatever,
yes.
If you say it in the wrong manner, that is the crime rather than the crime.
And that's happened a lot, hasn't it, Paul? Where, you know, people saying things about what happened with the grooming gang situation found themselves speaking indelicately and being arrested.
Yeah, absolutely. And you should be able to speak without being delicate at all about that particular crime. It's disgusting.
And we've also had people, of course, given really draconian jail terms recently for admittedly horrible tweets. But my issue with that is I don't think the police should be arresting people for even saying horrible things, because that's the price you pay for living in a free society.
No, absolutely, and I'm an advocate for free speech. I mean, I probably don't believe it's absolute, so there is some grey areas. However, I find myself in a very peculiar situation agreeing with Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin. Yes, I've chosen today to come out because Sinn Féin. If you read what they say about this, they don't believe in this hate speech law either.
Right.
They're completely against this, and it just goes to prove a point, and that there is no consensus across the Irish government, across the Irish Parliament for this, as there isn't in the British or Scottish or Welsh parliaments either, and that's the problem. Nobody can define what hate speech is, and I'm actually rapidly forming the opinion that hate speech is no issue whatsoever, and it's something that's been invented by politicians to get them elected.
Well, this is the point. Well, if you say that hate is illegal, and then a future political party says, well, we think that criticising the government is hateful, then you have a legislation that justifies them locking people up.
So it's not a law as such, but in terms of how behaviours have changed, so obviously I'm a stand-up comedian and I do these clips online and blah, 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 and I'm clearly in a comedy club, I've got a microphone, it's got a comedy club sign, hot water, whatever, but videos will get taken down, so I do a joke about my daughter and that she needs shooting. It's taken down because it's inciting violence. And you're going, it's a joke, it's clearly a joke from a comedian about her child.
Yes.
But there's no recourse. You can appeal it.
And by the way, something that many parents have said about their children.
Yeah, but this is
that as well.
But this is what we're talking about. This is what we're actually looking towards making criminal.
Well, because context
at the moment,
is
it just gets,
context is key.
It's getting taken down off my Instagram, annoyingly, after 1 million views.
Really?
Yeah.
Because
you've
gone viral. Inciting hatred against your daughter.
Yeah, so that can be taken down. There's no criminal charges. But what we're discussing here is that potentially that is what we're looking at.
Yes.
That my saying that on a video clip is hate speech.
Very disturbing. And it sounds insane, what Jojo is saying, but actually the Scottish police were receiving training of what to do with offensive jokes delivered by comedians in a comedy club.
Yeah.
So it's not out of the realms of possibility. We're going to move on now to a question from Anne. Anne, hello.
Hello. Should Sandra Brindley resign as chief exec of the rape crisis in Scotland?
Yes.
Yeah, this has been a huge Jojo Sorry. It's a huge story. I should explain for the people at home, because Sandy Brindley is chief executive of Rape Crisis Scotland, and she, of course, presided over the recent scandal where you had a male trans activist hired as the head of Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. And I would have thought, quite obviously, Jojo, women who have suffered sexual assault want to go to a space where there are no men present. That's a legitimate request. This is not bigotry. This is not hateful. No. So why won't Sandy Brindley take responsibility for what's going on?
Because we're ever moving into that situation, people don't want to say what they think that people don't want to hear. It's that she's terrified of being piled on. She thinks she's on the right side of gender politics, gender identity. And this isn't about whether somebody who's, you know, trans woman running a CEO It's about the women that have been through a situation. And you can argue with me till you're blue in the face. If you've been brought up as a man, if you have lived in a society where you've been treated as a man, if you have lived in a the trans CEO grew up in India, a particularly male-dominated society where women are marginalised, and you are incredibly ingrained with that thought process.
Yeah.
I know when I'm speaking to a woman compared to how I'm speaking to a man, and whether you feel like a woman, you have been brought up and you have been treated as a man, and there is no way on any earth you can tell me that you know, because I adopted ways of coping as you're growing up as a woman in a woman's space, how we live in a different arena to men. We know this.
Yeah.
So do not come and tell me that you are a woman, because you will reply and respond as a man, even if you are identifying as a woman. End of.
And of course, there's another issue, isn't there, which is, we could say that if this individual was being discriminated against in employment terms for a job at a supermarket or something, or a job at a library, whatever, we'd always say, well, you shouldn't discriminate based on their biological sex. But this is a rape crisis centre. This is a different... This is where you are allowed to apply the sex discrimination law.
100%, because if you have been raped as a woman, as I have, sadly, and I'm sure probably not the only one in here, that a man will never understand how that feels. Now, I'm not saying that Rindy doesn't understand sexual assault, but it is a different type of sexual assault. We have been brought up to walk, looking over our shoulders and being careful. They went to school in an all-boys Catholic school. So, again, the way that you're a product of your environment, and the frustration, it's not about not accepting people who are trans. It's not about not saying, trans women. Trans women are trans women, of course they are. But they're not women. They can't be women, because until you have lived and walked in my shoes as a woman, you will never know what it's like. But other women do.
Yeah.
But if you've been brought up with a male brain and a male environment, it's not about how you feel, it's about other people, how they treat you. And if you've been treated as a man, your response in a civilised situation is to respond as a man.
Very interesting. Paul, I think Jojo makes an excellent point, and I don't think it should be considered bigotry or hateful to acknowledge that people who identify as trans women are trans women, but they're not women. And that's...
It's as simple as that.
It's a matter of fact.
Quite frankly, I think that Sandy Brinley should watch what Jojo Sutherland just said, and politely hand her notice in.
Can I ask a question, actually? And obviously physically not possible for me to. As a black woman, can I begin to understand or know how you have been brought up, the situations that you felt, and how you've been treated in society as a black woman compared to a white woman?
Oh, OK.
So if
Jojo, we can't hear the audience, unfortunately, but the point you're making is that obviously we all grow up in our own situations. Yeah. We all know what we have experienced.
And I would be absolutely hammered if I said, well, I'm absolutely...
Yes.
I know how to live as a black woman. I'm exactly the same as a black woman.
We can get a mic to our audience member now if you want to talk. Yeah, is that mic working?
Yes.
No, I don't think you could possibly know what it's like to walk in my shoes.
So, if I could become a black woman, you would accept me as a black woman and say, yes, you absolutely get how I am.
Well, once again, you couldn't just become a black woman overnight, because you'd have had to have been born and lived the life. So
yeah,
and it's
very
very
I agree with what you're saying.
You mentioned that because it sounds impossible, but there was a woman called Rachel Dolezal, a white woman, who identified as a black woman and became the head of the NAACP. And that, so these things, they do happen, and it sounds made up, but it's absolutely real. Anyway, we're going to have to move on. Fascinating topic, but we will have to move on at this point. We're going to a question from Kim.
Oh, I am Kim.
Kim, you sit here, darling. You come and have a seat here.
It's going to become your show, Kim.
It is.
Get out of that seat.
My question is, should feminists be allowed at party conferences?
I'm glad you mentioned this, because there have been a number of cases where certain groups have applied to be at the Labour Party conference or the Liberal Democrat Party conference and been turned down. I'm thinking in particular of LGB Alliance, actually, of course, whose founders have been on this show. And the latest case of discrimination along this line is Plaid Cymru, Party of Wales. And they've now admitted that they unlawfully discriminated against a feminist charity. This is a charity called Filia. It's a feminist charity, women's rights charity, and they'd been in contact with Plaid Cymru and they said, we want to be at your stall, we want to be at your conference, we want to have a stall at your conference. But less than 48 hours before the conference was due to start, the charity had the booking cancelled. And Filia is just the latest example of this, Paul. As I said, this has happened at other conferences. Yep. Why can't it just be the case that political parties say, we're about politics, we're about discussion, let's have all people at the conferences, and you know, this is a women's rights organisation. It's not like you're asking the KKK to come in.
No, hopefully they don't.
I would actually draw the line at that.
Yeah. Sure. But this is the point, isn't there? There's kind of this narcissism around this ideology now, where one person or an oligarch of a few people believe that because they support a view, that their view must be the view that everybody else follows. Plaid Cymru is a broad church.
Yes.
You know, in the sense that its members, its voters, don't all think and say the same things. So you have to invite people to the conference that have different views, I think. And what was very interesting about this is, yes, they apologised, but they apologised saying we have to because of the law as it stands now.
Not because it's the morally right.
And not because
which suggests, A, it's not the morally right thing to do, and B, they would change the law if they could. I think that's more terrifying than turning down this woman's opportunity to speak 48 hours before conference.
There's a few parties that have had this problem. Yeah. SNP is another party of this kind. Liberal Democrats, Green Party. I've had former deputy leader of the Green Party on my show talking about how he's been through a court case with his party because they get this wrong.
Yeah.
Shouldn't it be the case that irrespective of the views of Plaid Cymru, of the people in charge of Plaid Cymru, they should say, let them come along and make their case?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what was the most disturbing thing about it was basically the accusation that they had a different opinion.
That was it, basically.
Wow. So, I mean, why are we having this discussion? What are we talking about? Let's all just, you know, inject ourselves with something and think the same way, and then we'll all be fine.
Yeah, that seems to be the way we're going, right?
How dull.
Yeah, really dull. A disagreement is fun.
Yes, of course it is. As long as you don't hurt anyone physically.
Exactly. So, Paul, no punching people in the face.
No.
Yeah.
I told you I wouldn't again.
Good, good. Well, look, next up on Free Speech Nation, the group Free Speech Brighton claimed that they were kicked out of a pub this week for having a speaker who wanted to discuss gender ideology in schools. So I've got two members of the group are going to be joining me in just one moment here in the studio. Please don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
70% of population will make a judgment on someone just by looking at them. And within 2-3 seconds, we make a decision if we like someone or not.
Really? Is it that quick?
So it's actually very, very fast. So before we have a chance to kind of express what we want to say, our subconscious mind is kind of looking for clues. So you look at someone and you look at their, for example, I don't know, the watch they're wearing, maybe the makeup. I spent literally my whole childhood learning, being absolutely mesmerized by my mom's ability to choose different style of clothing for different style personalities. British definitely take a pride in their appearance. They do spend time to look good. There is a lot of amazing British designers. For me, it was always about that feeling that I've learned from my mom's shop, how the people were living, buying certain things. And I was like, oh my God, they look happy. They've got this big smile on their face. My main objective always was to make people feel good. So now as a stylist, I help them to go through style therapy. I help them to discover colours that are good for their colours that they wear them close to their face, but also it sets the tone for their wardrobe. And then we look at the outfit formula. So it's, yeah. When I look at Ellie's dress sense, I was just thinking, OK, she likes to be polished.
I do like to be polished.
Exactly. Elegant, timeless. I look at the reference to the dress you're wearing today. It's that kind of Chanel, black and white, timeless, never go out of fashion. So for me, it's about, it's not the trends, but how you would like your personal style to be and how timeless it can be.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This Monday, the king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This week, Free Speech Brighton, a sister group of the Free Speech Union, claimed that they were kicked out of a pub in the city for discussing trans issues in schools. The group booked a room in a pub for an evening of speeches and discussion when they claimed security guards came and asked them to leave after one speaker began to talk about this topic. Now, a clip of the evening was, in fact, posted to social media. Let's have a look at this.
This is Britain. It doesn't have to be offence. Yes, What's the complaint? Who from? From the management of this property. Well, then they can tell us. No, they don't have to.
It is a private premises. So now you have been asked to leave. Anyone refusing is now trespassing.
OK, we did contact the pub for comment. However, they did not respond. But with me now are two members of Free Speech Brighton, Laura King and Emma Wall. Welcome both to the show. Laura, I want to come to you first as chair of this group. We saw there in the clip the security guard actually pulling away the speaker or attempting to dismantle your equipment.
Yes.
It seems very heavy-handed. Can you give us some background to what happened, what the event was for, and why you booked it?
Our normal pub was being refurbished, so about 3 weeks ago I went in and booked a local pub for a meeting, and they didn't ask any questions about what sort of meeting. It was in a back room. It was mainly secluded from the rest of the pub, so I thought it would be fine. But anyway, they didn't ask any questions. They took my booking. We arrived, I set up. The first speaker started speaking, who's a retired teacher who was concerned about trans in schools and how that affects children. But she was talking purely about children. She was not talking about adults who have protected characteristics, obviously. And then towards the end of her speech, I became aware of security guards standing behind me in the middle room. So I went to have a quick word with them and see what they wanted. And they said, we've had a complaint. And I said, what's the complaint? And they wouldn't say. Then they said, will you come and talk to the landlord? So I went to the front of the bar and they indicated this chap was the landlord, but he looked about 20, so I don't think he was the landlord. So I said, I hear you have a complaint about us. Can you tell me what it is? And he couldn't. And I said, look, we're doing 3 different talks, completely different subjects. We're in an enclosed space. Please tell me what the problem is. And he wouldn't. So
well, that sounds very Kafkaesque, as though you've committed a crime, but they can't tell you what the crime is.
Well, that's what I couldn't understand, because, you know, you might... Obviously, they can't tell you who the complainant is, but they should be able to tell you what the complaint is.
What were the other talks that you had scheduled for that night?
Well, the next talk was actually by the champion of direct democracy in this country, Neil Petrie, and ironically the third speech was by a lady called Simone on, ironically, government overreach.
Government overreach.
Yes.
OK, well, there we go. So, Emma, can I bring you in now? Because you witnessed the whole thing.
Yeah.
This sounds extraordinary, you know, a free speech event. We've seen a number of gender-critical feminist events being booted out or having this kind of treatment, which is also appalling. This actually wasn't a gender-critical feminist event. This was a free speech event.
Yeah.
And had people presumably disagreed with what the speaker was saying, there's a forum there to discuss it. Isn't that the case?
There is. I'm not sure that they're completely aware of that. They could easily. It would have been far less antagonistic if they'd just come in and said, we don't actually agree with what you're saying.
Yes.
I couldn't exactly tell. There was a curtain, and my friend who was sat next to me said she could see somebody beyond the curtain who was obviously kind of
so you think someone overheard?
I think so, but maybe just picked up snippets, because it was very much about the safeguarding of children, and it was about what's going into schools that we're not aware of. But yeah, there were other topics coming up.
And then what did the security guards do?
they came in and they said, well, obviously we had a complaint and we need you all to leave, basically. And we're a bunch of people who kind of know our rights, and we were saying, well, we haven't done anything. Well, why are they asking us to leave? We're not committing, there is no victim here. We're just quietly having a chat.
Yes.
But they were very heavy-handed.
Well, we can see that from the video, of course. And so what eventually happened, Laura? Did you all, in fact, leave the pub?
Well, actually, they first... I thought I'd sorted it out, and then I saw them advancing into the room, and then somebody tried to grab the speaker, and it was still plugged in, and it was my speaker, so I intervened and said, you can't steal that speaker, you can't damage it, it's mine, and it's still plugged in, and they tried to ignore me, and they grabbed my arm, and I said, that's assault. I'm going to report you to the police. And then they let go of my arm, and I managed to get the speaker back. And meantime, the rest of them were pouring into the room and saying to everyone they have to leave. And people were pretty incredulous, and they had drinks in their hand. And I said, why do we have to leave? We haven't done anything.
Yes.
And it was literally 50 people of like 25 to 80 age range, just enjoying a chat, listening to the speaker. And then they were going to get a Q&A afterwards, and then the next speaker after the drinks break. And
the security guards looked pretty hefty to me.
They had stab vests on. It was ridiculous.
Well, I mean, you look very, very dangerous, Laura, I have to say. I mean, this is just an absolutely astonishing thing to have happened. And now I believe the Free Speech Union have got involved. They're looking into this because the views that the speaker was espousing are protected by law under the Equality Act. Of course, the gender-critical views are protected. So booting someone out on those grounds, of course, it's difficult, isn't it? Because the pub haven't said why they did it, or they haven't said what the complaint was. What was the general atmosphere in there like? How did people feel?
Well, free speech is free speech. That is, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter what you're talking about. We have to have the right. If we're not able to speak about everything we want to speak about, then we're living in a police state.
Yes.
And maybe we need to have signs made up to invite people in, because obviously we get an email telling us that this thing's happening. We're members.
Yes.
But it's just... Yeah, I mean, we've had other talks in another pub about also. I've done a couple of talks there, and nothing's ever happened.
Never been a problem.
No, it was obviously that subject for sure.
It must have been. I mean, I certainly know as well that in Brighton, in particular, there's a high, shall we say, concentration of activists with this particular obsession.
And the Brighton and Hove City Council, I believe, created the TIT, the Trans Identity Toolkit, which was being talked about.
Right.
And really, this friend of ours, she's 30 years as a teacher, retired teacher, and she is just concerned that this is not... that children... OK, so they say they're a cat 1 week, so you don't start feeding them... you don't start feeding them whiskers. You just let them
I would suggest not.
And puberty blockers, I mean, she mentioned the fact that puberty blockers are... Puberty is a natural process.
Yes.
And if children aren't allowed to go through a natural process, then they're not going to develop normally.
So these all seem like reasonable points to discuss. I discuss them here every time on my show, and the police and the security guards don't come in here. Yet, anyway. So tell me now, what's going to happen next, Laura?
Well, obviously, the Free Speech Union are doing their thing with their barrister, and I'm not quite sure what action they're going to take just yet. We're due to have another meeting next month. Our pub has been refurbished. We'll have to see if they allow us back, but maybe we'll actually suspend talk about this particular subject for a while, because we have covered it recently now. But we do talks about all sorts of things. We've even had one on hunting, which is something that triggers me a bit, because I don't agree with hunting. But she was a lovely lady. She made a lot of good points.
And she was pro-hunting?
She was pro-hunting.
And you didn't complain and get some security guards in to kick her out?
I was chairing. It would have been rather embarrassing to complain against myself.
Well, this is the whole point of free speech. It's about discussion.
Absolutely. And treating with respect. And one of the guards said something about hate speech. And I said, look in that room. Can you see any hate going on? I can't see any hate going on. We've got Julie Burchill there, for goodness sake.
Yes.
You know, she's a well-known journalist. She won't be involving herself with any anything scurrilous.
I think a lecture on hate from people wearing stab vests is...
that is quite funny, yes.
Oh, well, I really appreciate you both coming on. Laura King and Emma Wall, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next up on Free Speech Nation, Bernadette Spofforth, the woman who was arrested for inciting racial hatred and sending false communications on the identity of the Southport killer, is going to be joining me after Cheshire Police said no further action will be taken against her. Please don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you have managed to have a decent weekend, though some of us have been dodging heavy pulses of rain around, and they'll be continuing into next week as well. Even throughout the end of Sunday evening, parts of Wales, central southern areas of England have those heavy outbreaks of rain to contend with. It is slightly drier further towards the north, with some clearer spells holding on for parts of western Scotland at least, and underneath that things could turn a little bit chilly. Some rural spots seeing a touch of frost, but for most of us underneath the cloud and rain, it certainly will be a mild, muggy night, temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. An amber weather warning does come into force from Monday morning, and that stretches from parts of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, up through the Midlands and over towards the Humber and the Wash, where we could see over a month's worth of rain falling on Monday. So some localised flooding and disruption is possible, so do please take care over the course of the day. Quite cloudy for Northern Ireland and generally cloudier as well for much of Scotland. There are a few sunnier breaks, hopefully holding on for the likes of Dumfries and Galloway, but we will start to see some rain arriving into the very far north of Scotland during the day, and that will continue to push its way southwards into the likes of the Highlands of Lewis and Harris later on. Those outbreaks of rain will continue on and off for much of Wales, central, northeastern parts of England during the day. A few brighter spells trying to poke their way through across the southeast, still though with a few showers here. Temperatures in that sunshine managing to climb towards 21 degrees Celsius, but elsewhere generally feeling cooler between 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. The low pressure that is bringing this area of heavy rain will gradually move its way off eastwards as we do head into Tuesday, so things will be turning drier and a little bit calmer for Wales and England on Tuesday itself, though still relatively cloudy and any bright spells fairly limited. We'll also see that rain gradually push its way southwards across more areas of Scotland, with some brisk winds around at times, and those northerly winds will start to feed in some cooler air as well. So things are set to be turning colder for many of us as we head over the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my wonderful panel, Paul Cox and Jojo Sutherland. We'll help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. If you've got any problems at all, no matter how personal, well, actually, there is a limit there, but you know what I mean. Just judge it carefully. Just send us a message at gbnews.com/yoursay, and we'll get some advice from my two panel members. Now, you've all probably heard the story of Bernadette Spofforth. She was arrested on the 8th of August on suspicion of stirring up racial hatred and sending false communications after she was accused of sharing incorrect information on the identity of the Southport killer on X. Despite adding the caveat to the post, "if this is true," and deleting the tweet when she discovered the information was false, Spofforth was arrested and held in custody for 36 hours. This week, Bernadette shared that Cheshire Police have now decided to take no further action due to insufficient evidence, and I'm delighted to say that businesswoman Bernadette Spofforth joins me now. Bernadette, welcome to the show. I want to ask you first and foremost what happened, because a lot of people watching may not be aware of the situation, but you tweeted something out that was considered quite inflammatory. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, I was quite distracted that day, and obviously everybody was, and they've been watching the news. And I scrolled just for news on my phone under the term Southport. And I'd seen a post of a guy whose children had been in that particular class that day, and I clicked that. I scrolled again. I saw a name and a sentence, and I copied and pasted it, and above it I put, "If this is true, there will be hell to pay." and posted it, put my phone down and went outside again. Now, I know that I did not source that tweet, and had I given it 10 minutes more thought, I would have deleted it because I hadn't sourced it myself. But I went outside and I didn't come back to my phone for an hour or so. When I came back to my phone, I did immediately just delete it because I knew that I hadn't sourced that information for myself. And
So
that was it,
that's
really.
the question, isn't it, Bernadette? Because, of course, to say it's an asylum seeker, it's rumoured to be an asylum seeker with this name, but this was completely false. A lot of people will say, well, you should have done due diligence. You've got a large account. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do, except you're immediately jumping to the line that my detractors jumped to. You see, for me, it was about the mental health excuse again. You know, we hear this all the time. There's lots of attacks. A little girl was murdered last year. We had 3 people killed in a park. We'd had a soldier killed on the Friday. And what the press are reporting is this is a mental health issue. And I'm quite interested in local issues. I'm very interested in national issues, one of which is this constant issue about we don't have enough resources for mental health. And if you look at that, we had 150,000 institutional beds for mental health in the 80s, and now we have 17,000, but our population is 10 million people larger. So we definitely do not have the resources for people who are, I don't know, asking for asylum here or coming here from traumatic circumstances. We can't look after them, which means the government can't look after us. Now, I appreciate that that wasn't how that post came across, and that's why I deleted it, as well as source the information.
So let's be clear about that. So you've tweeted out false information. It was a mistake. When you recognised that it was a mistake, you deleted the tweet. But by that point, the police had got involved. Now, what happened then? The police, did they visited you at that point? Is that correct?
No, for the next 3 or 4 days, there was this huge concerted effort on social media to engage the police. They wanted the police brought into this situation. And within 24 hours, there were newspaper articles. They all claimed I was guilty of sending this post, first of making up this information and inciting riots, which of course I didn't do. And you think you believe in the justice system. You know that if you don't do something, then you're innocent and it will be fine. But people didn't care about that. This huge pylon of people who perhaps didn't agree with me and people who didn't know me but wanted to blame me anyway, triggered this response from the press. And once the media had me in their sights, then the police, I think, were pressurised to act.
And there's a big question here, because you had spent 36 hours in a cell for saying something that wasn't correct. Well, a lot of people have said things that weren't correct. The head of Hope Not Hate put out a tweet around this time saying that Muslims were being attacked with acid. That was completely false. I don't believe anyone's arrested him at this point. The BBC put out a report saying that the IDF were targeting medics at a hospital in Gaza. Completely false. They admitted their mistake and it was all wrong. And so isn't this a broader question about why are the police getting involved with human beings making mistakes about information which they later correct?
Well, I think the cynical part of me would say that if you're not protected by the badge of journalism, and you are just a normal person, but you have quite a large following, then you can be made an example of. And I think I was made an example of. You know, five police people turned up, 3 cars, a van. They came and they searched me. They dragged me off to the police station. They held me for 24 hours. And they had my devices. They could easily download what I'd done. It was quite obvious. All the information was there. All the evidence was there. But they then held me for another 12 hours. And still knowing that they had nothing, because I'm really, honestly, on my devices, there are bonsai trees and dogs. Still knowing I hadn't done anything, they put me on bail. But extraordinarily, my bail condition was that I could not engage on social media at all. So I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't reply to the press. I was completely silenced because they knew there was nothing.
But you've had help from the Free Speech Union around this time, hadn't you?
They were wonderful. Honestly, everybody should join the Free Speech Union because they were on the phone. Immediately I was arrested to my husband. They provided, I already had a solicitor happily, but they provided solicitor help, barrister help. But not only that, Andrew, you know, there's other help you need. They have press specialists. And even more importantly than that, you know, my life was utterly destroyed. It has been utterly destroyed. And they provided psychologists, psychotherapy, people to just talk to you, help you balance what had happened, help you not drive off a bridge. Honestly,
well, let me ask you about that, because that's really important, isn't it? The fact that what this has done, this has changed your life, hasn't it, effectively? And going forward, it's going to be harder, isn't it, for you in all sorts of realms of life as a consequence of this action?
You have to think about this really seriously, Andrew, and I would say that to everybody. The press and the authorities took a coach and horse through my democratic right to the presumption of innocence before proven guilty. They named me, they decided what I'd done, they decided why I'd done it, and they described me as this hideous person, destroying my career and my reputation that I built for many, many years, just destroying it. And there's no comeback on that. I have to pick up the pieces, but I was innocent of what they were charging me of. How can that possibly ever be fair? And that's the big thing about free speech. They don't have to legislate about it. They don't have to stop you speaking. They just have to terrify you into not speaking, because the process is the punishment.
Absolutely. Well, Bernadette Spofforth, I really appreciate you coming on and telling your story. Thank you ever so much indeed.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
OK, well, next on Free Speech Nation, the Bar Standards Board has published new guidance on equality, diversity and inclusion for lawyers, and Sarah Phillimore is going to be here to discuss what that means. Don't go anywhere.
The Britain I grew up in was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public. Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth, available at gbnews.com.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
My next guest is a composer and film director whose musical journey began at the tender age of 4.5 when he started playing the piano. Under the tutelage of luminaries such as Sir George Benjamin and Sir Harrison Birtwistle, he has honed his craft, primarily grounding himself in the classical world. He's written music in sets of composition in the 24 major and minor keys of the chromatic scale, producing an album which is accompanied by 24 videos, and it's called 24. I'm joined now by Fabio D'Andrea. Fabio, great to see you. Tell me a little bit, I'm a layman when it comes to music, tell me a little bit about how a composer chooses a key and what it means to the composer to have chosen the key.
Sure. Well, I think every musical key, and there's 24 of them, major and minor, they have their own feel. So you could play a piece in, say, C major, which is normally regarded as the simple key, it's all the white notes on the piano. But if you play that piece, say, in A flat major, it's going to have a very different feel. So I decided to create this project, 24 pieces, again, looking back at our traditions and the history of what composers have done in the past, especially in regards to piano music, and explore every key, see if I could bring out the emotion that you feel from that actual key itself.
Were you fonder of some than others? I imagine, for example, you're not so fond of C because it's too straightforward.
Actually, no, I love all of them. And that's the beauty of music. Every key has its own feel. And some keys are associated with different feelings. So, for example, C major has actually been historically associated with victory. It's quite a victorious feel about it. I love D flat major. That's quite mellow. But every key has its own special feeling. And sometimes something will just sound different in that one key, and it's meant to be in that key. So for me, this has been a whole exploration of that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The Bar Standards Board, the organisation that regulates barristers in England and Wales, has recently launched a public consultation on new rules to promote equality, diversity and inclusion at the bar. One particular core duty has been replaced from saying barristers must not discriminate unlawfully against any person to you must act in a way that advances equality, diversity and inclusion. Well, joining me now to discuss this is family lawyer Sarah Phillimore. Welcome, Sarah. Now, that's quite an interesting development, isn't it? The change of language to actually saying that lawyers have to be proactive in the promotion of a certain value system. What's going on there?
I wish I knew. It's very odd because I thought generally there was a move in organisations, corporations to move away from EDI because it's counterproductive. It's harming productivity. It's encouraging the workforce to report microaggressions and be divisive.
Yeah, this is equality, diversity and inclusion.
But now we have the Bar Standards Board getting rid of a perfectly necessary and serviceable duty. You must not discriminate, you must not harass, you must not victimise. Of course you must not. And that's pretty easy to identify when that's happened. They want to replace it with terms that they haven't defined and they can't define. And my fear is I know what they mean. When they say diversity, inclusion, equality, they mean including people who think as we do. They don't mean diversity of political thought. And because this duty applies to us, it's not merely about hiring and firing and interviewing people. It applies to everything we do in our work. So if I have clients, which I often do, who say things that might be a bit racist, a bit misogynist, they might be a reform voter, what am I to do then? Am I to say, I can't represent you, you're not promoting diversity, inclusion and equality? That's actually, I think, unlawful, because our duty as barristers very clearly is we take the briefs we're given, if they're within our competence and we're paid fairly for them. We do not say in advance we will refuse to act for certain individuals or categories of individuals.
But this is astonishing because the Bar Standards Board, if they're, you know, this is a legal body that should understand the need to be specific when it comes to the definition of terms. So they've really made no effort at all to define what it is they're asking people to do.
Well, there's sort of links to discussions of the usual word salad that comes out of social justice critical race theory. And of course, we know it's a nonsense. We can't be equal. We won't be equal till we're dead. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to promote diversity where we can, because of course it's useful. As Matthew Said has written, if you don't have a diverse workforce, then you fall into groupthink, you don't challenge your ideas. But the mistake that's being made is simply by saying, by virtue, say, of me being disabled or me being black, I would therefore automatically must be pushed forward, given a position, because I possess those characteristics. That in and of itself is something that must be promoted. And that's really dangerous.
Now, a lot of organisations have been infected with the EDI thing to the extent that group identity is the thing that is prioritised above all else. But people have thought that the law is the one remaining sphere where the ideology can't penetrate, because if it does, that impacts everything, doesn't it?
Well, the biggest shock to me when I received news of the Bar Standards Board consultation was to be told that solicitors have actually been under a similar duty since 2018. And I was sent a blog post by someone called Professor Vaughan, who said, imagine this, a client comes to see you and they want to, I don't know, promote fracking in another country where it's legal. But do you give life to your client's instructions, or do you think, hang on a minute, how does this impact women, disabled people, people of colour? Now, that is, if I may use the technical legal term, insane. It is not any lawyer's job to stress test their client's case against their own internal version of what is worthy, what is correct, and what should be included. Our rights are to promote our clients fearlessly, independently. Obviously, we have a duty to the court, which often transcends the duty to the client. But it's never been any part of a lawyer's role to say to a client, well, your case just doesn't fit within the parameters of what I inwardly feel is proper.
So when will this come into force, these new guidelines?
I hope never. There's a consultation on at the moment, and it does seem to have caused quite a stir. I've got at least 6 barristers now who are going to join me in a judicial review if it does become a core duty, because I believe very firmly, as you probably gathered, I think it is unlawful. It's preventing us doing our job. Everybody has a right to legal representation, even the unpopular. We spoke a while back on your show about the declaration by Jolyon Maud and others that they wouldn't act for big oil and they wouldn't prosecute anyone who committed crimes against big oil. And I said to you then, and I repeat it now, they should be disbarred. That is contrary to the fundamental ethics of what being a barrister means.
You have to be able to defend anyone, irrespective of your own personal views. But I suppose your detractors might say, yes, but this is just making sure that a lawyer isn't treating someone differently because of the colour of their skin or their...
Well, then you have the perfectly serviceable rule that we mustn't discriminate. That's absolutely necessary. Of course, I'm 100% behind that. I'm disabled. I'd be horrified if someone discriminated against me for that. I'd equally be horrified if I found out I've been given a job or a case just because I was disabled. That is insulting to me as a disabled person. It doesn't promote equality because then people see I've been promoted above my competence. I'm a diversity hire. It causes problems and division and resentment.
Yes.
It is dangerous and it is bad. And I think we have to now... I have been naive. I thought lawfare would sort this out. I thought we'll achieve a few clear-cut victories in the court, which we did, and everything would go back to normal and people would stop being mad. That hasn't happened because the people who are pushing this ignore the law. So I'm now firmly of the view we've gone as far as we can with lawfare. I mean, obviously, I'll still JR the guidelines. I think they're awful.
Yes.
But we need to be very clear who these people are. I think it's a small group of people with positions of power and influence over a great many institutions.
So
we need to know who they
within
are.
the institution.
We need to know who they are, and we need to root them out. Otherwise, I'm really concerned that this insanity will not end, because we can't keep going back to the courts. At some point, the penny has to drop, and people have to realise what the law actually says and does and means. It's essential to have any kind of society worth living in.
Well, Sarah Fulham, I really appreciate you coming on and explaining this to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of the first hour on Free Speech Nation, but we've got plenty of fantastic interviews coming up, as well as some questions from our beautiful studio audience. Please, don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you have managed to have a decent weekend, though some of us have been dodging heavy pulses of rain around, and they'll be continuing into next week as well. Even throughout the end of Sunday evening, parts of Wales, central southern areas of England have those heavy outbreaks of rain to contend with. It is slightly drier further towards the north, with some clearer spells holding on for parts of western Scotland at least, and underneath that things could turn a little bit chilly. Some rural spots seeing a touch of frost, but for most of us underneath the cloud and rain, it certainly will be a mild, muggy night, temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. An amber weather warning does come into force from Monday morning, and that stretches from parts of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, up through the Midlands and over towards the Humber and the Wash, where we could see over a month's worth of rain falling on Monday. So some localised flooding and disruption is possible, so do please take care over the course of the day. Quite cloudy for Northern Ireland and generally cloudier as well for much of Scotland. There are a few sunnier breaks, hopefully holding on for the likes of Dumfries and Galloway, but we will start to see some rain arriving into the very far north of Scotland during the day, and that will continue to push its way southwards into the likes of the Highlands of Lewis and Harris later on. Those outbreaks of rain will continue on and off for much of Wales, central, northeastern parts of England during the day. A few brighter spells trying to poke their way through across the southeast, still though with a few showers here. Temperatures in that sunshine managing to climb towards 21 degrees Celsius, but elsewhere generally feeling cooler between 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. The low pressure that is bringing this area of heavy rain will gradually move its way off eastwards as we do head into Tuesday, so things will be turning drier and a little bit calmer for Wales and England on Tuesday itself, though still relatively cloudy cloudy, and any bright spells are fairly limited. We'll also see that rain gradually push its way southwards across more areas of Scotland, with some brisk winds around at times, and those northerly winds will start to feed in some cooler air as well. So things are set to be turning colder for many of us as we head over the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be then watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Luke Douglas Hugh is a plogger. It's the act of jogging and picking up litter at the same time.
Oh, I thought it had something to do with cycling, but I was thinking of recycling. You better explain what the term is.
Plogging originates really as an expression from Sweden, from someone called Erik Alström, who combined the two words of plocka in Swedish and jogging, so plogging.
And what does plog uppa mean?
Picking up.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Do you take a bag with you or something and you pick up rubbish? There you go.
Absolutely, yeah.
In terms of being a jogger, how do you combine the two? Because joggers wouldn't want to
keep up the pace,
Yeah, they wouldn't want
you?
to keep stopping to pick stuff up, would they?
I'm the coastline runner. I run the coast collecting plastic pollution.
Which
mainly.
coast?
Well, I've done the whole of the East Coast, from Lowestoft to Leith.
Wow.
And then cut across from Edinburgh to Glasgow on the Grand Union Canal.
Yeah.
A few years ago, someone said, Luke, don't get all grand and stuff. You're not the coastline runner, you're just a plogger. And I thought, hang on a minute, what's that? And I looked into it, and I realised that that's what I was doing.
Do you do it entirely on your own, or do you do it in groups?
I do it. I originally started on my own. I got clapped off by a mayor in Great Yarmouth, but now more and more people join me, and I.
What I find interesting is that, I mean, jogging, you could say, is just something you do for yourself, for your body, but what you're doing is something extra. I mean, you're making a difference. Do you think you make much of a difference?
No, to be honest.
Oh.
I don't. I think I'm making a difference in raising awareness of not polluting our beaches so much.
GB News, the People's Channel.
There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week, but let's get a news update first from Sam Francis.
Andrew, thank you, and very good evening to you. It's just gone 8 o'clock. The top stories tonight. MPs, officials and ministers have been in Liverpool today for the first party conference of an incoming Labour government since 1997. The Deputy Prime Minister wrapped up day one at an event on housing, promising to protect social housing by fixing what she called flaws in the current system, which allows council homes to be sold at a discount. She stressed the need for a balanced approach, allowing long-term tenants to buy their home, but ensuring homes can still be replaced. Angela Rayner has also promised the biggest wave of social housing in a generation, saying it could be crucial for people's well-being and future security.
I make no apologies for some of the housing targets and some of the changes we've made within the planning reform system. And we've got to make sure that within that we won't meet our 1.5 million homes target within 5 years unless we've got that mix of social and council housing. Whether I wanted them or not, that is the only way we're going to meet that target. I think everybody knows that. But I actually think it's a moral mission of the Labour government to recognise the problem and to build the social housing we need.
Angela Rayner there speaking at a Fringe event in Liverpool. Well, the conference is running until Tuesday, ending, of course, with Sir Keir Starmer's leader's speech. But the Labour leadership is also gearing up for a major conference showdown tomorrow over cuts to the winter fuel payment. Trade unions are demanding a U-turn on the policy, which removes payments from 10 million pensioners. Unite has launched a billboard campaign and is set to hold a protest outside the conference in Liverpool, calling those cuts cruel and politically inept. Chancellor Rachel Reeves, though, insists the move is necessary to fix a £22 billion shortfall in the budget. And it could also be trouble for Sir Keir Starmer elsewhere in the UK, as the SNP's Westminster leader Stephen Flynn has said that the new Prime Minister's failing to deliver on the change he promised to Scotland in the July general election. He claims that despite the SNP being willing to work with Labour, Sir Keir Starmer's, he says, completely out of touch with Scotland and the issues the country faces. It comes after the Prime Minister's already faced criticism over those cuts to the winter fuel allowance and his acceptance of clothing donations. Well, earlier, our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, asked the people of Glasgow if they feel Sir Keir is delivering.
In 3 months, give or take, this Labour government, how do you think they're performing for Scotland?
1 out of 10.
Really?
Yeah.
Again, why?
I'm a pensioner. They've taken my winter fuel allowance and it's wrong.
I had high hopes for Keir Starmer and no, it's all gone.
Has there been any? I haven't really noticed much, to be honest.
I'm ashamed to say I'm a Glaswegian, really, when I see the state of the place. And if that's 13 years of SNP, we're in big, big trouble. Well, no, we might be out of the trouble now with the Labour in. I don't know. Just a matter of wait and see.
Well, news away from politics, and it's been reported that 4 people in the US have been killed and dozens others left wounded after a mass shooting in Alabama. The Birmingham Police Department have said that attack took place in the 5 Points South area around 11 o'clock last night. Authorities also believe multiple shooters were involved, though no arrests have been made so far. According to local media, those officers that responded found multiple victims at the scene. Sadly, 3 were pronounced dead, while a 4th later died in hospital. And finally, an update on news in the Middle East. The Foreign Secretary says there needs to be an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah following what he's called a worrying escalation in the region. David Lammy says the ongoing hostilities are in nobody's interest and advised British nationals to leave Lebanon. It comes as Hezbollah's deputy leader has said the terror group is now in an open-ended battle of reckoning with Israel. He made those comments during a funeral for a top Hezbollah commander killed in an Israeli strike on Friday. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you at 9 o'clock. Now, though, over to Andrew.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. We've got a wonderful audience here. Let's use them to their full. Our first question comes from Gordon. Where is Gordon? Gordon's over here. How are you, Gordon?
Very good. Given the resource constraints in the NHS, does it really make sense to ban the use of physician associates in GP offices?
OK, now this story broke this week and it probably requires a bit of explanation. I've been following this online. The Royal College of General Practitioners has basically voted to ban physician associates, what they call PAs, from working in practices. Now, people might not know what PAs are. They're staff members who don't go to medical school and they instead do a 2-year postgraduate training on top of a degree in a subject like biomedical sciences. Now, in other words, Paul, you have a group of people called physician associates. They used to be called physician assistants, now they're physician associates, sleight of hand there. People think they're getting medical expertise. They think they're getting medics. And my understanding is actually it's against the law to describe yourself as a physician unless you're a doctor. But there's been all these people working as though they were doctors, or at least people have been getting that impression.
Yeah, on the face of it, it's quite dreadful, I think. However, we've got this crisis in the NHS in our country for a whole raft of reasons, and it's a symptom and a reaction to that problem. There's a couple of things there. First of all, you're absolutely right. The patient should be entirely aware that Derek, whilst he's looking all rash, is not entirely qualified to do so.
Yes. Well, they used to do things, the PAs used to do things like help with blood tests and things like that, where you know, fine.
And that's okay.
That's fine. But when you're dealing with people who are basically taking the role of what doctors should be doing, there's actually a real risk to the health of patients.
And that's the second point I was going to make. There are actually, sadly, people who have died as a result of being misdiagnosed by PAs.
Right.
Now, doctors misdiagnose. People are humans and humans make mistakes. But doctors are experienced and qualified, and we accept that occasionally things will go wrong. Sure. It's very unfortunate. But when you discover in that process, particularly as a grieving family, that was a PA who probably wasn't anywhere near as qualified nor experienced enough, it creates a huge issue. And it's all about trust. If you lose trust in that first contact with the NHS, then you're not going to trust any other contract.
So also, my understanding of this is that the PAs, there's a 100% pass rate on this course, right? So in other words, these people who are not masquerading as doctors but are being perceived as doctors, I mean, anyone can do it.
I genuinely had no idea that they existed. Does anybody know about them? I had absolutely no clue. I sort of used to live in a small village, so, you know, the doctor's surgery, but I didn't know there was such a thing as physician assistants. But I think the terrifying thing is that you don't necessarily know that's what they are.
Sure.
And secondly, there's Google.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
well, there's that.
You know what I mean? Google would be just as helpful in terms of diagnosing as if that was a physician's assistant's job.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, exactly. Well, in a way, it's a good thing that the RCGP has now had this decision. They've had this vote, and this comes after a long time of various medical practitioners really pushing for it. But I'm pleased to say, because obviously this involves that we require more expertise. I think I will have a medical expert coming on to discuss precisely this story in a couple of weeks' time. So do join us again then. We're going to have to move on, though. We've got a question coming from Jeff. Where is Jeff? Hello.
Does calling a dog male, describing a dog as male, transphobic?
Well, Jeff,
I mean... Or is it just part of the insanity that's infused into this nation?
Jeff, why have you been describing dogs as male when they're not?
Not me, not me.
No, not you. I mean, a number of us have been reading about this this week. We were talking about it on Headliners. What it is there was a Zoom meeting.
Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Has somebody given you acid? What's happening?
Let me explain the story first, and then we can react. Cambridge County Council, basically, there were employees on a Zoom. Someone had a dachshund, a sausage dog, and described the dog as gender fluid. And another member, Lizzie Pitt, who was also an employee, expressed that she has gender-critical views and doesn't recognise the gender identity of the dog. And this became a big legal battle. It apparently cost taxpayers about $63,000 because the dog was called Pablo, right?
Of course he was.
Which I think is a clear. There's Pablo there, gender-neutral dachshund in a dress and what looks like a tiara. Anyway. Obviously, a very flamboyant sausage dog. I don't take that away. But really, does this need... There's the dachshund on a trans... Does the dog on a Zoom being misgendered or having someone else say that they don't recognise the idea of a gender-fluid dog, does this need a big court case? I should say that the social worker, Lizzie Pitt, she was reported, someone else was reported as well. They were deemed to be transphobic, non-inclusive, and the Employment Tribunal did conclude that Ms Pitt had been harassed for having gender-critical beliefs. She's been awarded over £55,000, £8,000 in legal cost. But why did it happen to begin with, Jojo? Why did...
I'm not playing. I'm not playing. I'm having nothing to do. I'm not playing. It's ridiculous.
A gender-neutral dog?
Stop it.
Well, we can't stop it because it's news. Because it's
no, I know, but if we don't...
These poor women were dragged through the courts for this.
How do we stop this? Seriously. Come on. It does... Do we all feel that we're on some kind of trip? That something's not... I can't bear it.
Try hosting this show for 3 years.
Oh, my God!
After a while, you start thinking you're in the twilight zone.
What date is it? Is it the 1st of April?
It is not. It is not. Well, the thing is, Paul, I'm continually feeling like Jojo is that at some point you just think the lunacy has got to end. People have got to wake up because we shouldn't be having discussions about gender-neutral dachshunds.
We absolutely shouldn't. I'm glad we do because I've got bills to pay. But it's ridiculous. There should be at least one Jojo or one Andrew in that whole process. It should never get to the point where it goes to court and we're talking tens of thousands of pounds. No. Somebody at some point should go, this is ridiculous, all go back to school and behave yourselves. The other thing, of course, is...
Go to your room.
Exactly that. But the whole thing about the trans ideology debate is it's about self-identification. Do you see that dog? It looks entirely embarrassed by the situation. That dog has not identified itself as anything other than... It was probably called Dave. And all of a sudden he's now Pablo and wearing a dress and he's there going, what is all this about?
There's no way that dog identifies as gender fluid.
No way.
Well, probably when it's having a pee is fluid. But apart from that,
No, it's ridiculous. Right, well, anyway, it's a very cute dog.
Very cute dog. And actually, I'm going to get social services involved and have them take him off him.
Yeah, well, quite an extreme reaction, but maybe. By the way, we have to give a right to reply. The council spokesperson has said this. We strive to create a safe, inclusive and compassionate environment for people to work in and recognise this needs to be balanced with everyone being entitled to express their own views and beliefs. We will reflect carefully on this final outcome, as well as undertake a review of our policies and procedures accordingly. That's the council statement on their gender dash. OK, let's get a question now from Jenny. Where's Jenny? Hi, Jenny, hello.
Hi. So do you think Rachel Reeves is right to remove paintings of men from a stateroom in Downing Street?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This is our new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has demanded that pictures of men by male artists are removed from the stateroom in number 11 Downing Street. And I suppose this is a... well, she wants to make a point, doesn't she? She wants to kind of celebrate amazing female figures. But Keir Starmer, just a few weeks ago, demanded that the painting of Margaret Thatcher was taken down. So I don't know what's going on here. Mixed messages?
I think it's how it's interpreted, isn't it? And in terms of, yeah, I mean, the way it's being said, get rid of men, I don't think... Well, that might be what she's trying to do. I have no problem whatsoever of filling the walls of Downing Street with
women.
With women. For, do you know what I mean? Because why not? I mean,
do you
it's
object
great.
to the Margaret Thatcher picture being taken down? First female Prime Minister, that's quite a big deal.
No, it is a big deal. I mean, I can also understand. I wouldn't like her breathing down my neck if I'm trying to, you know what I mean, eat my sandwich.
Well, that's an aesthetic point of view.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can understand maybe why. Yeah, take her down, but put her up somewhere else then if you're going to celebrate. But I wouldn't celebrate Margaret Thatcher, but that's not my...
What about you, Paul? What do you make of this?
I did some cursory researching of Rachel Reeves, actually. First thing is she's the same age as me, which is upsetting. The second thing is she's got 2 children. One's a daughter and one's a son. So in her living room at home, I assume she's taken down all the pictures of her son.
Well, rightly so.
And just put up the ones of her daughter.
Fair enough. Well, good for you, Rachel. Let's move on now. Got a question from Luke. Where's Luke? Hi, Luke. Hello.
Hi, guys. Should the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square be reserved for a monument to our late monarch or continue to be used for wokey, sort of transgender things?
Yes, I get the gist.
You wanted to use another word there, didn't you?
Today, and I saw the new monument. And it is bad, let's be honest. If it's art, it's not good art. Basically, it's hundreds of plaster face casts of transgender, non-binary and gender non-conforming people. The idea of the sculpture is that it disintegrates over time. It's one of those sort of highly conceptual art forms. I know there are people who get a lot out of this. This sort of stuff leaves me really, really cold. I kind of think, shouldn't we, on that 4th plinth, use that as an opportunity to try and produce something great that will stand the test of time, that will, not just something that is basically ideological propaganda, because that is all it is, really, isn't it?
And it's been that way for some time, even way before these culture wars as we see them now.
Yeah.
There have been a number. You've only got to look to see what's been on there, and you'll be able to see that most of it's not in sort of some sort of generic taste. It's always used as something to be standing out in some way.
Yeah.
It would be great, considering it's been 2 years since Queen Elizabeth II died, to have her on that 4th plinth just for a year or so. It might calm things down. The idea that this thing disintegrates over time, I'm hoping that's a metaphor for the whole culture war.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's interesting. I've got nothing against people enjoying modern art and conceptual art and all the rest of it. That's absolutely fine. I mean, this is quite a high-profile public plinth, Trafalgar Square. I think we should aim higher. That's all. Just a matter of taste, really. And I also accept that some art can be propagandistic, but I find propagandistic art to be really boring. I don't like it when I'm being preached at when art is concerned.
What was on the plinth before?
Well, nothing for a long time. And then there were various... Do you remember there was the one of the whipped cream with the fly on it and the drone on it?
Oh, yes.
Which was also absolutely terrible.
No,
so,
and again, there is terrible art, and we have to accept it. And again, it's like comedy; it's subjective. So, you know. But
although
again,
I haven't met anyone who liked that whipped cream fly.
No, and we've got something similar in Scotland. It looks like a sort of turd on the top of John Lewis.
Oh, OK. So, maybe that's just John Lewis describing their wares.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting when we come to sort of public sculptures and statues and things, that there's still the ongoing row about the Eric Gill sculpture outside the BBC, which has been vandalised again, and BBC are furiously trying to keep it there when it's by someone who we found out was a paedophile, who had been sexually abusing his children.
So that's really interesting, because the Eric Gill statue, which is above Broadcasting House, obviously Eric Gill was discovered later in the publication of his diaries to have been a sex offender, and I don't think anyone... I think everyone recognises that's absolutely abhorrent and disgusting.
Yeah.
But this raises the question of, can you separate the art from the artist?
Yeah.
My feeling is that if you get rid of art, because the artist has done something morally repugnant, you're going to lose a lot.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
artists
Well,
can
it
be
comes
awful
back to the
people.
sort of, you know, this, slave traders and things, isn't it? That you can't... Yeah, where do we start with history or, yeah...
Where do we stop with the Western canon? Do we bulldoze the Parthenon because they were a slaving society? Do we paint over the Sistine Chapel because it is alleged that Michelangelo did some terrible things?
No, none of those things. No, it's very difficult because you can't and never... In the end, you really can't separate the art from the artist when you know... You can't unknow something you learn.
Yeah.
And when it's as apparent as child sexual abuse, you know, you can't separate that. There will be no Hugh Edward statue outside the BBC. But there might be, actually.
If Hugh Edwards had painted something as good as the Sistine Chapel, I still would object to people painting over it.
Well, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
We'll never know.
Theoretical bombshell. Let's move on. Next on Free Speech Nation, Ireland's Minister for Justice has confirmed that she has dropped plans to introduce new hate speech laws. I'm going to be joined by Irish writer and political commentator John McGurk to explain what's been going on. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GBNews, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are non-crime hate incidents a breach of your human rights?
It's crazy, isn't it? Freedom of speech is now on life support here, and we've had, in the last week alone, we've had Elon Musk being threatened. He's now out of Brazil with X. We've had the founder of Telegram basically being arrested, and he's been charged in France. We're not quite sure the circumstances why he was there, whether Macron invited him to the Olympics or whatever, but he's been arrested under several charges. And we've had all sorts of people who've been speaking out are basically being shut down. So it has to be freedom of thought. It has to be freedom of expression. It's one of our fundamental rights under the Human Rights Act of 1998. Article 10 gives you the right to express your opinion and also to air that publicly.
It's basically I say something that somebody doesn't like, so probably one of my monologues. Then somebody can then inform the police that I've upset them in some way. And then that goes on my record, so I now have a criminal record. Because somebody else who I've never met, who's never met me, has heard something that upset or hurt your feelings. Then if I go for a certain job or I go for my DBS check, which I do regularly because I go and talk in schools, somebody could pull that up and go, well, you did something that had hurty feelings, and so now you can't have that job. That has got to be a breach of my human rights.
Oh, it's absolutely. Article 10, it's a fundamental right to protect your freedom of speech and so on and so forth. And this is what's really worrying, because it's happening around the world, as I say, in Brazil, in France, in various other countries. In America, you know, Zuckerberg, he came out in the last few days and said the pressure that he was put under by the Biden administration, first of all about COVID, and even jokes he was told to suppress them. The other thing that he was saying about the Hunter Biden laptop. And he said he couldn't speak about that because they were telling him not to. And what he did, he had to fact check, and he turned around and said he regretted that, because the reality is you're working on that sort of basis.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This Monday, the king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The Minister of Justice for the Republic of Ireland, Helen McEntee, has confirmed that she has dropped plans to introduce new hate speech laws. Ms McEntee said that there was no consensus for the hate speech laws at present. The Minister did say, though, that she wants to push forward with the hate crime element of the legislation. The proposed legislation has received a lot of criticism from the likes of Elon Musk and also opposition parties. So, joining me now is Irish writer and political commentator John McGurk. John, welcome to the show. I want to ask you for just some background here to the Irish hate speech law, which has been seemingly dragging its heels for a long time now. What has the controversy been all about?
Well, the controversy has basically been that the law is exactly what it sounds like. It's a law to regulate speech, and it's a law to regulate public debate. And there have been significant concerns raised both by those of us in the media, or some of us in the media, and many in politics, that suggest that, look, the law is much more than simply about regulating hatred. The issue that's arising is that if you look at, for example, in Irish law, the definition of gender, gender is defined as male and female. There are only two, but the hate speech law made it potentially a crime to criticize somebody's gender identity. So there was. There was a conflict between the definition of gender both in Irish law and the definition of gender in the bill, which raised the prospect of people being prosecuted for restating what the Irish legal definition of gender is. That's just one example of the problem with the law, Andrew. The other examples, the other problems with the law were straightforwardly that it was very clearly intended, and many ministers had spoken in these terms, to have a chilling effect on speech. Every time they talked about this bill, it was in the context of protests around immigration, protests around the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, where they were pretty much straightforwardly saying, look, we need to regulate this kind of speech. So they were specifically crafting legislation that was overtly intended to chill one corner of the political spectrum. Now, I think that's and many people said this is a fire alarm going off in our democracy when you have the government kind of overtly stating, or at least implying, that this is their intention. Because frankly, in Ireland, we don't want to become like you guys are in the UK. I was watching the other day, or just over the weekend, somebody getting arrested in London for allegedly expressing support for a terrorist organisation. And it strikes me that if you're prosecuting the speech, you're ignoring the bigger problem, which is the support for the terrorist organisation and the fact that people feel free to articulate those views. And I think there are many of us in Ireland, and thankfully a consensus across the political spectrum, who came to the conclusion that, to take away free speech and to regulate people from saying things is a little bit like a country with a heart disease problem banning heart monitors. When you start to eliminate free speech, what you do, in effect, is to take away that vital signal that there might be something wrong by simply telling people that if they use a different form of words, they'll be fine. Whereas there are many people, thankfully, in the country, I think, who still value the idea that, even if there are unpleasant things being said, it is much better for society to be aware that they're being said than to hide away and criminalise them and pretend that that deals with the problem.
One of the concerns, John, has been the wording of the legislation that was proposed, and specifically the definition of hatred. And the definition of hatred appeared to be hatred against anyone from a protected characteristic. But if you have a circular definition in law, if hatred just means hatred, doesn't that leave it wide open to future exploitation by governments as yet unconceived?
That was certainly the fear. I mean, hatred is as you rightly point out, it's a term that is sometimes in the eye of the beholder. I mean, if I say that I hate Liverpool Football Club as a Manchester United fan, what does that mean? Is that the same kind of hatred somebody might feel that is expressed in a racist or bigoted way towards a different group of people? That was one of the concerns, but it wasn't the only concern. I think there were deep concerns. The concern was that it was bad legislation, but bad legislation being set out to achieve a bad purpose. Like when you have legislation that is specifically targeted at the idea that, we will go after people for saying things we don't like. And when you have then also loosely defined, as you point out, those things that we don't like as being generic hatred, then the question ultimately becomes, well, who are we? Who are we, and what does the we represent? So what hatreds are we particularly upset about? So, for example, I mean, this is not new or revelatory stuff, but I mean, there are many different groups in society who express various hatreds. Some of it in ways that everybody instinctively recognizes as racist and bigoted and offensive, and others in ways that perhaps we don't recognize as much. So like, what about ageism or anti-Catholicism or expression of contempt towards Christian views? Is that a hatred on the same level as a hatred towards migrants or LGBT people or whatever you may have? So yeah, there are loads of questions around that.
And how do you feel? Helen McEntee said she's dropping the hate speech element of the hate crime bill, but there's all sorts of potential problems still within the remaining legislation. And are you really convinced that this hate speech element won't rematerialise in some other form?
No, and I mean, there's no guarantees that it won't. I mean, Ireland is due to have a general election on or before February next year. So, I mean, I think we're probably safe until then. But I mean, there are political parties in the Oireachtas, which is the equivalent of Westminster in Ireland, who are keen to bring this back, who may, we don't know, get into government. And as you point out, the legislation is proceeding with this hate crime element, which will be a common knowledge for people living in the UK what hate crime is. But I mean, to me, that looks like criminalising people for their thoughts. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you are attacked on the street, you're attacked on the street, and that is the crime. And saying that one person who's attacked on the street has had a more significant crime committed against them because of what the person who committed it was thinking in their head strikes me, and I think a lot of people, as illogical. But at the same time, that is problematic, but not quite as problematic as what has been stripped from the legislation, which was an overt attempt to regulate and criminalise people for expressing their political or other viewpoints.
And what do you make of critics of yours who might say, well, you know, we've seen civil unrest, we've seen disruption on the streets, and we've seen open declarations of hatred towards migrant communities and people from other cultures, and there needs to be some way to tackle that. Do you accept that point of view?
I think there are two things here. I think, first of all, people on the right have been very committed to a long time for winning the right to freedom of expression and protecting what you call the marketplace of ideas. And I think we've just accomplished that. We've protected the marketplace of ideas. But protecting the marketplace of ideas is not the same thing as winning in the marketplace of ideas. This is what I would say about those criticisms. The Irish national broadcaster, RTE, a few days ago ran a documentary programme about some immigration protests in which they showed on camera people using disgusting racial slurs and epithets to describe migrants and other people of colour. And RTE chose to broadcast that. Now, why did they do that? They chose to do it, I think, because that kind of free speech is valuable in its own way, because it is illustrative of a kind of problem that's there in our society. When you actually can see people using extremist language or extremist phrases, you are at least aware of the problem. And you are able to address it, and you're able to identify it, and you're able to say, look, we have to tackle these people and defeat them in the marketplace of ideas. When you start banning that and essentially give people, like, these are the lines in which you must stay when you're speaking verbally or expressing yourself in writing, well, you're not actually getting rid of those ideas, you're simply obscuring them from the rest of our view. And this is what I was saying about the gentleman in London who was expressing or alleged to have expressed support for Hamas. If you arrest him and ban him from using that particular form of words, that doesn't mean that he's suddenly going to reconsider his views. It simply means that he won't express them in public, and you won't have a clear sight of the problem. So I would say in relation to that you have to judge ideas on their merits, and you have to, I think, all of us in society who have the right to free speech must live with the reality that some people will abuse it. Just as people abuse every right and every entitlement granted to them by the state, or indeed their natural rights. So, but it's for the rest of us to be vigilant and to combat that and call it out for what it is. It is not for the state to simply prosecute these people, sweep their arguments under the carpet, and make martyrs of them, which is what would happen. Because all of a sudden, one moment you've got somebody shouting racist language at black people on the street, and the next moment you've got that person in prison saying, I've been sent to prison because I said something bad about this group, but look at what these people are saying about my group. And then all of a sudden you're making them into a martyr. It's a very silly road to go down, and I'm glad that for now we've put an end to it in this country.
John McGurk, thanks so much for talking to us about this issue. Really appreciate it. And next on Free Speech Nation, we're going to get the latest from the world of arts and culture with historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt. Don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GBNews weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you have managed to have a decent weekend, though some of us have been dodging heavy pulses of rain around, and they'll be continuing into next week as well. Even throughout the end of Sunday evening, parts of Wales, central southern areas of England have those heavy outbreaks of rain to contend with. It is slightly drier further towards the north, with some clearer spells holding on for parts of western Scotland at least, and underneath that, things could turn a little bit chilly. Some rural spots seeing a touch of frost, but for most of us underneath the cloud and rain, it certainly will be a mild, muggy night, temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. An amber weather warning does come into force from Monday morning, and that stretches from parts of Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, up through the Midlands and over towards the Humber and the Wash, where we could see over a month's worth of rain falling on Monday. So some localised flooding and disruption is possible, so do please take care over the course of the day. Quite cloudy for Northern Ireland and generally cloudier as well for much of Scotland. There are a few sunnier breaks, hopefully holding on for the likes of Dumfries and Galloway, but we will start to see some rain arriving into the very far north of Scotland during the day, and that will continue to push its way southwards into the likes of the Highlands of Lewis and Harris later on. Those outbreaks of rain will continue on and off for much of Wales, central, northeastern parts of England during the day, with a few brighter spells trying to poke their way through across the southeast, still though with a few showers here. Temperatures in that sunshine managing to climb towards 21 degrees Celsius, but elsewhere generally feeling cooler between 15 or 16 degrees Celsius. The low pressure that is bringing this area of heavy rain will gradually move its way off eastwards as we do head into Tuesday, so things will be turning drier and a little bit calmer for Wales and England on Tuesday itself, though still relatively cloudy and any bright spells fairly limited. We'll also see that rain gradually push its way southwards across more areas of Scotland, with some brisk winds around at times, and those northerly winds will start to feed in some cooler air as well. So things are set to be turning colder for many of us as we head over the forthcoming week. Bye-bye.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. So let's get a roundup now from the world of arts and culture, and who better to discuss them than historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt. Welcome to the show, David. OK, David, so tell us what's been going on.
Well, very briefly, last week was Sir Antonio Pappano's first week as chief conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra, where he's come from the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. I was lucky enough to go last Sunday to hear him conduct. He had as his soloist the extremely celebrated Chinese pianist Yuja Wang, who I must say I didn't quite get the fuss about. It's very apparent that already the LSO and Sir Antonio have forged a great rapport. He brings all of the verve and precision of an opera conductor of 20 years at Covent Garden, before that many years elsewhere, to the orchestral repertoire, and I predict off the basis of that one concert, plus listening to reviews of the others, that this is going to be a seriously good thing for London.
Oh, well, that's great news. And then you have another story.
Yeah, well, I've just come back from the Cliveden Literary Festival, which was established by the historian Lord Roberts, Andrew Roberts, and Natalie Livingston, who is also an historian and whose husband owns Cliveden House in Buckinghamshire, famous for its involvement with the Profumo scandal in 1963. Which was, I say this every year about Cliveden, it is the finest literary festival in this country, and the lineup this year was astonishing. We began yesterday morning with a discussion between the historian Sir Neil MacGregor and the former head of the Secret Intelligence Service, Sir Alex Younger, about what Sir Alex thinks of the current situation, insecurity around the world and the future of it. Somewhat sobering, but absolutely fascinating discussion. Today, the Hollywood actress Rachel Weisz was in conversation with Emily Maitlis, which, you know, to get an actress of Rachel Weisz's standard to a literary festival was extraordinary. It was particularly nice to see her and Daniel Craig at the dinner last night. But I think
Crikey, you're rubbing shoulders with the...
Well, no, they were 20 feet away.
Oh, right, OK, fine.
Don't worry, they were safe. I think the standout, though, that everybody would agree on was yesterday's discussion between the novelists Sir Salman Rushdie and Ian McEwan, particularly Rushdie talking about the attack in August 2022, where he was stabbed 15 times while on stage at an event in New York by, well, and we must say his alleged attacker, because he still hasn't been convicted or indeed gone to trial, was a Lebanese-American who apparently had read 2 pages of Rushdie's famous book, The Satanic Verses, but was motivated by the fatwa against the Satanic Verses and against Rushdie, which was imposed in 1989 by the Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran, with a $3 million reward.
And I dare say that the Ayatollah hadn't read the Satanic Verses either.
I'm not sure he would have done. And this was famous at the time because Rushdie had to go into hiding for many, many years. The Japanese translator of the book was stabbed to death. The Italian translator was stabbed and grievously injured, as was the Norwegian, I believe. Anyway, Rushdie, over recent years, has not had security at events. He felt able to live a normal life, and he said while discussing this book that, in fact, when he was being stabbed and laying on the floor while the attacker was held down by members of the audience, he thought, but this is an anachronism, why now? Why are you doing this now? But throughout the novel, throughout the memoir, sorry, and throughout the discussion yesterday, despite what has happened to him, despite, he's, I suppose, rather, you could say, would be rather reasonable for him to think that people saying he should be killed should be suppressed. He was virulent in his defence of free speech, absolutely without any conscience whatsoever. Yes. He just said, no, there must be free speech. And even if it leads to people being in danger, even if the ideas themselves are inflammatory, they must be heard. There must be argument about them.
I mean, this is fascinating. I read his previous memoir, Joseph Anton, which, of course, details his experience of going into hiding, having the security service all the time. Terrible experience for anyone to go through. But not just that, but the endless debates on TV about whether he brought it on himself.
Well, including people like
a book.
John le Carré, for instance, had said at the time, well, he should have been more responsible. He should have thought about the consequences. And perhaps you can make the argument that he should have thought about the consequences, but the argument that he should not have published it, I think, coming from any author, is bizarre.
Absolutely.
And I think it was rather heartwarming. The audience was clearly very moved by the discussion. McEwan and Rushdie have known each other a great many years, so it was a really amusing discussion between 2 old friends.
Yes.
But as your viewers may know, Rushdie lost his right eye, so he now wears a pair of spectacles with a blacked-out lens. He lost the use of his left hand. He was severely injured, 15 stabbings, including to the torso, to the liver, and so on. So it was a moving thing, but it was also galvanising.
And does he give a sense of what he writes in this new book, Knife, it's called?
Yes.
I mean, is he at that point now where he thinks that, free speech has been lost? Because I don't think the Satanic Verses, or something akin to the Satanic Verses, could be published today.
He basically made that point. He said, while the book was being published, bear in mind that it was published in '88, the fatwa imposed in '89, and throughout the world the translations are going on. He and his publisher had to fight and fight and fight to get that to happen, to get there to be translations, and for it to remain in print. And he basically makes the point it just wouldn't happen now because there isn't the appetite for it.
And it's very interesting to hear him being such a vehement defender of free speech when, as you say, there have been some vociferous critics against him.
Yes.
And saying that he ought to shut up, he's responsible for everything that happened, all of the rest of it.
Yep.
But even when the stakes are that high, he recognises, well, not just in terms of politics, but also in terms of arts. Free speech is at the core, surely.
Well, again, this is a point that both McEwan and Rushdie made, that without the freedom to express ideas and to debate them and to be controversial, to be perhaps inflammatory, you have no artistic freedom. You have no freedom of conscience. And the freedom to express those views. And it is perfectly reasonable, I think we both agree, that if someone says something which is straightforwardly inciting, say, violence, then they should be censored for it. Censured, I mean, not censored.
Yes.
They should be held to account for it. But there should still, in my view, be that freedom to make that point, and you take the consequences, whether social consequences of ostracisation or the legal consequences of prosecution if, for instance, something you say leads to someone being murdered.
Yes. But when it comes to literature, I mean, we have to have the assumption of complete freedom.
Yes.
For any kind of experimentation, any kind of risk-taking. What do you think this has done to the world of literature more generally, to have this kind of awful, ominous example that has been set by the treatment of Rushdie?
Well, I think we both agree that it's stifled the publishing industry, and that the publishing industry has stifled itself on so many subjects. And if you think of the history of freedom of publishing in this country, really it goes from the Lady Chatterley trial in 1963 through to probably that time of the fatwa issued against satanic verses, maybe through the 90s. There were some controversial novels, you know, Bret Easton Ellis, Michel Houellebecq, the French novelist, whose work's been translated. But I think most publishers now simply lack the spine. They lack the backbone to stand up for controversial ideas and the right for them to be expressed, and for the right of authors to push the boundaries.
Well, there seems to be a double thing, doesn't there? Because, you know, there were bookshops that were burnt, firebombed at the time of the Satanic Verses fatwa. So there's that pressure from repercussions from lunatics, frankly. But you've also got people within publishing saying, no, we have a responsibility to send out the right moral message. You have the implementation of sensitivity readers and that kind of thing.
Yes, and
that's
warnings on books, history of fiction books published years ago, warnings that these do not reflect the attitudes of the time. Well, of course they don't. That's one of the reasons we read books written in a different age or context from our own, is to be exposed to those differences.
Yes.
But there seems to be this pusillanimity now that people can't possibly comprehend something that is without their very small limits, and that if they were exposed to it, they'll somehow disintegrate. Well, good. Those people deserve to be, as it were, intellectually disintegrated if they're so weak and feeble as to be unable to deal with something that is challenging. And I don't know about you, but I find books that challenge nothing utterly boring.
I totally agree.
It's the equivalent of a glass of water. It may be in some way nourishing, but it has no flavour. It has no challenge.
I particularly like the university that put a warning on Julius Caesar, 2 students of English literature saying it contained a murder. You know, I think if you don't know that already, you probably shouldn't be studying it.
Well, and the same has happened at the Globe and at the Royal Court and at Stratford, that, you know, Shakespeare, Coriolanus, for instance. Although they don't seem to give the very worst ones, which we discussed before, the graphic warnings they deserve.
Well, Titus Andronicus.
Yes, exactly.
You know, that's fine. You can cut up 2 kids and serve them to their mother in a pie, and that's OK, apparently. Well, look, David Aldred-Bolt, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Next up on Free Speech Nation, Donald Trump's comments about immigrants take a musical turn. Ed Davey sings ABBA. And Angela Rayner reminds us once again what Sir Keir Starmer's father did. It's time for Social Sensations. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
With record temperatures expected this week, how do zoos keep their cooler creatures cold? Well, at Yorkshire Wildlife Park, the polar bears are enjoying a vegetable ice block.
Polar bears, they do have quite a variety of different temperatures that they naturally do find. Once they're moving off these polar ice caps, they are in the likes of down in the areas of Canada, Hudson Bay. Naturally, they were finding polar bears in 35-degree temperatures year upon year. So they are very much used to warm temperatures and heat waves as such. What you'll tend to find is they'll go for a good swim and then go for a snooze in the shade thereafter.
Not wanting to miss out, the sea lions are treated to a huge fish lolly.
In the hot weather, it's really important to give them ice because these guys, they don't drink salt water. These pools are actually saltwater pools. They actually drink fresh water. They've got 2 freshwater pools in their house, but again, being able to provide that in their outside enclosure is also really important. So offering them ice with their fish is not only enriching, but it's actually beneficial to their welfare as well.
Other animals like the lemurs will be basking in the sun, but also cooling down with frozen sweet potato.
So we've got 3 different species of lemur here. They come in all different shapes, colours, sizes, but they are native to Madagascar. Madagascar can get quite hot, understandably, so throughout the cold months here in Yorkshire, we do give them a nice heated house all year round, but especially making sure it's nice and warm in the winter for them. And it does mean that in the hot spells as well that we're able to keep our eyes on them and try and give them things that make them a bit more comfortable with that incoming hot weather as well.
The frozen food on offer here certainly has the seal of approval on what could be the hottest day of the year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's time for Social Sensations. That's the part of the show where we look at what's been going viral this week on the dreaded social media. First up, there's this video which gives a musical take on Donald Trump's recent comments. Absolutely viral. I mean,
I can see why that's really catchy.
It is quite catchy,
It's really catchy, yeah.
That Donald Trump had such a good voice.
No, indeed.
But it's interesting. He's the most memeable politician who has ever existed, isn't he? You know, I mean, when I saw that, I just thought, why are you degrading the debate again? Can't we have a proper discussion? We don't have to talk about cats and dogs being eaten, but actually the tune's pretty good.
No, it's great. I was dancing away. Yeah. But there's another meme as well. There's one where they compare Donald Trump with the assassination of...
Which one? Abraham Lincoln?
No. When Obama's doing about the assassination of bin Laden.
Oh, yes.
And it's just really sort of presidential speech. And then...
they compare Donald Trump talking about another one.
Yeah,
well, when you compare Donald Trump to other statesmen, it doesn't always come across as well as he'd hope. What do you make of that clip?
I love all that sort of stuff. But, you know, quite seriously, when Donald Trump does these things, he just absorbs all the energy away from anything. Now, for the same reason, I'd like to see him debate slightly better. Yeah. Because there's a good chance he could become leader of the free world once again. However... that's in some way. I don't know if he's accidentally genius. He's able. Well, that's all we're talking about. I can't remember anything Kamala Harris said.
But Kamala Harris did a similar thing where she tried to make herself about the brat generation and the Taylor Swift endorsement and all of that kind of... But I kind of wish, can't we get back to politics?
You'd think so.
Yes, no, I'd like some politics, and I do quite like Kamala Harris's thing about autonomy rights for women.
OK, well, there we go. So that's a policy thing. There we go. So something actually political. Let's move on to this video from the Lib Dem conference this week. That is a thing, by the way. Ed Davey here, and he's grabbing the headlines once again. Let's have a look. He just doesn't care, does he? Like, after all the sort of falling off the canoes and the tripwires...
But that was his whole sort of campaign, wasn't it? It was to be a sort of man of the people. And
no, isn't it just they decided they are a joke party?
Yeah,
They're just embracing it now.
Yeah, going for it.
They're just going for it, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's worked for him. He managed to double his MPs, or quadruple his MPs, just by going to the theme park and falling in water.
Yeah, I know, but it's just so daft.
It is ridiculous, but I think that shows us just how ridiculous our politics are now. Yeah. Because there is room for that.
Yeah, sure. And
that is the third biggest party in our country.
Other people have done it. Theresa May did her dance, didn't she? And that was a big deal. And
and I used to get comparisons because my haircut with Theresa May.
Oh, no.
Yes. Look at it as well, and that doesn't help that you all laughed in agreement.
Yeah,
thanks.
but at least Theresa May dressed really well. She's got great taste. I mean that. I think she's got... Oh, come on, right. No, I'm going to go on record.
Was that a bad... Are you saying that I don't dress well?
Oh, well, I mean, that was a... I don't think that was a deliberate situation. Maybe on some level. Right, let's move on. Angela Rayner now. She dragged up a favourite topic of discussion at the Labour conference today. Let's have a look.
Oh, you may have heard me mention that I was a trade unionist. And if you don't know that, I should probably tell you that Keir's dad was a toolmaker.
Well, at least he laughed about it. He's going along with it. But, you know, he's made a lot of hay out of his father being a toolmaker.
He has, and his dad definitely is a toolmaker. Look at him. That is one of...
Oh, very good.
Yeah, that's just me.
How long did that take you to...
Nothing. It didn't take anything.
He's been dying to say that all...
Exactly. That's been stored in his little back pocket,
He was hoping that would come up. Look, we haven't got much time left, so we're going to have a look at your unfiltered dilemmas. Thanks ever so much for writing in, as ever. We got a dilemma here from Jane. And Jane says, I always offer to buy my colleague something from the shop when I nip out at lunch. Most politely decline, but one always asks for me to buy her a can of pop You still say pop, OK. Usually I'd let it slide, but I reckon I've spent more than £50 on drinks now. How can I recoup my losses? Jojo, that seems like a lot. I mean, at some point you've got to...
Send her out to get the pop.
Right, quite.
Just it's your turn, lady.
So that's your view on that. What about you, Paul? What do you think?
Yeah, you have to do that. Pop. That's what I've got stuck on.
For me, that's the thing.
I was just thinking, who is it? I was imagining my nan in about 1984.
Going
asking
some Vimto.
Yeah,
maybe
well, it would have been SodaStream, actually.
Maybe it's someone who's so posh that they think they've got staff.
Yeah, maybe.
Go get me some pop, love.
Go and get me some pop, absolutely. We don't know, Jane, we shouldn't judge. OK, we're going to move on to a dilemma from Alex. Alex says, I've just moved into my girlfriend's flat and thought I should make a big effort with gifts and presents to celebrate the move and start on the right foot. I'm now a bit worried I've set the bar too high, too early. Any advice? What did you buy her? Like one of those, what was it? Like a diamond?
But why would you buy her gift? She's already invited you to live with her.
Yes.
What do we start off on the right foot? Just be nice, mate. Put the bins out.
No, but if you buy a whole bunch of like, Fabergé eggs or whatever it might have been.
No,
like,
exactly.
Then where
Fabergé eggs.
Yeah, where do you go?
I was just thinking of a posh thing. I think of a thing posh people have. Posh people are surrounded by Fabergé eggs. Isn't that right?
But he's just on a classic sort of, you know, trying to impress a woman by buying all these things, and then he'll just go down and go, well, stop it, just,
Pot noodle.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Jojo, what do women want?
What do women want? I've no idea.
There you go.
I'm not one, apparently.
OK. We've got a final dilemma this week from Elliot. Elliot says, I've been discussing Christmas plans with my family this week. How do I tell my nan that at age 22 I no longer want to sit on the kids' table for Christmas lunch?
Tough.
What do you think?
No, I'm absolutely, because when we had a big family Christmas and there's 26 of us, and my elder children who were older than that had to sit at the kids' table because there wasn't enough chairs around the big table with the grown-ups.
So there's a pragmatic element. You're not trying to patronise them.
No, and yes, it's just the seating arrangements, and also the fact that you never grow up in a household. The children are always the children, regardless of age you become.
I think that's right. Listen, I'm sorry you can't go to Paul because we've got no more time, but thank you for joining us for Free Speech Nation. This was the week when there was a further scandal at Rape Crisis Scotland. Angela Rayner reminded us all that Starmer's dad was a toolmaker, and the Irish government apparently remembered that free speech does indeed matter after all. Thanks so much to my wonderful panel, Paul Cox and Jojo Sutherland, and to all of my brilliant guests this evening. And by the way, if you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our lovely studio audience, that is dead easy. Just go to sroaudiences.com. The website address is on the screen right now. You can apply there, come along, and we feed you, we give you drink, we ply you with alcohol so that you laugh more freely. That's the trick, especially when Paul's in. That's what we have to do. But do stay tuned. We've got the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight. That's coming up next. And also, don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 o'clock. That's the late-night paper preview show where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. Thanks ever so much for watching Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. I'll see you next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you have managed to have a decent weekend, though some of us have been dodging heavy pulses of rain around, and they'll be continuing into next week as well. Even throughout the end of Sunday evening, parts of Wales, central southern areas of England have those heavy outbreaks of rain to contend with. It is slightly drier further